If my people Bible reading part 172, we are in the book of Galatians, and the key tone is shalom, peaceful, calmly, and caring. Paul is telling everyone he's talking to and everyone he's writing to in the book of Galatians to not back down one iota from what the Father has told you, what the new Torah instructions are, because the new covenant is full of new covenant, new instructions, new Torah. He's telling you that, and he's telling them that. And as we said in part 171, this is 172, chapter 2, verse 10, all they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. Now, that's talking about Peter and his apostle to the Jews. Peter has to deal with the old ways of doing things, and even worse than that, the added in nonsensical lies, the leaven that is put into the Torah of the Old Covenant. They have to do some cleaning house. They have to pay attention to what Torah says. When Yahweh says in the Old Covenant, he says, you must have a circumcised heart. You must, and to do that, here's this physical thing you do. You circumcise yourselves. That's an outward physical thing. But Yahweh's always been well beyond that, way beyond that. He's talking about the heart. And Paul's saying, see, you know all this, but now you've listened to the ways of men and traditions and false dogma and false doctrines. Back in those days, they were doctrines. These days, it's called dogma. By the way, dogma comes from a little historical thing. On the hill in which the Vatican was built was not used back in the days of Rome. There were 6 hills that were built on, but this hill was not. It was because it was something was wrong with it. The ground was all messed up. People had died in it, been left bodies there. So the land was full of multi-type things. It didn't hold construction very well. And dogs lived everywhere. Dogs that ate people. It was just a nasty, worthless piece of ground. Then history gets in and all kinds of false information that people believe in. And the next thing you know, the Vatican's built on top of it. And that's where they get their rules and instruction. But what happens on that land? Because everything that comes from that land, you have to follow the dogma. And it's been nothing but filth ever since. Filth comes from that institution. That institution, when we get to the book of Acts, shows that every pagan thing going on in those days, wearing of the funny hats, wearing of the funny clothes, saying particular things, going through sacrificial rites, going through smoke and mirrors, and going through saying particular things to make it go into you, saying different things to make it, all these things you got to do, selling plastic figures, selling figurines, selling statues, big ones, tall ones, wide ones, just like Abraham's father did, which was wrong. Wrong. It was totally wrong. So it was also wrong that the pagans did that, and so it was passed on to the Christian churches, because all Christian churches came out of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church still lives and breathes on all this craziness, praying through saints. You can't talk to Yahweh. You have to go through the Son, but they don't do that. No. They go through his mother, because his mother is a virgin. No, she's not. She had 6 kids. Oh, well, they had that through the former husband of Joseph. And she adopted them. Whoa, where did that come from? The lies just were top on lies on top of lies on top of lies on top of lies. So Peter is just saying, I do remember the poor. That is a commandment. And verse 13 again, the other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. They started picking up all of the Old Covenant Torah and all the Levitical laws and all the Talmud and all the sages and all the rabbis, and everybody had been making stuff up. All the Pharisees and Sadducees and all the losers. And they tried to do the Old Covenant and the New Covenant combined. Doesn't work. That's what the book of Galatians is all about. You've got to release the stuff that is leaven. And Paul just brings through it because he's a lawyer. Verse 18 in chapter 2, if I rebuild what I destroyed, I prove that I am a lawbreaker. For through the Torah, I died to the Torah that I might live for Elohim. I have been crucified with Messiah, and I no longer live, but Messiah lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of Yahweh, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of Elohim, for if righteousness could be gained through Levitical law, Messiah died for nothing. Chapter 3, you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Before your very eyes, Yeshua Messiah was clearly portrayed as crucified. Who is the author of bewitching, fooling? We know who it is. Verse 2, I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Ruach by observing the Torah or by believing what you heard? The answer is believing what you heard, because the soul within you, the Ruach, the spirit that lives within you, listens to the Ruach HaKodesh, and they recognize each other. Just as when Yahweh or Yeshua in the supernatural form in the Old Testament went before the number of the patriarchs, the first thing they looked at before they never questioned what they heard and what they saw. They said this, here am I, here am I. They didn't go through all these other things. So, verse 5 in chapter 3, does Elohim give you his spirit, his Ruach, and work miracles among you because you observe the Levitical law? Or believe what you have heard? Here he goes again. Paul's talking about it. Verse 6, consider Abraham. He believed Elohim. He said, here am I. And it was credited to him as righteousness. Understand then that those who believe are children of Abraham. And the scripture foresaw that Elohim would justify the Gentiles by faith. Paul's there for the Gentiles. Peter's there for the Jews. And announced the good news in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. So he's reminding them right from the start, this is not something from Paul. This is something long before you in the Jewish line, in the Hebrew line, in the Israel, the people, all 12 tribes line. It's for the whole world to hear. That's the important part of that, and that you cannot ignore. And he gives it to him. He's a typical lawyer. He's just giving them to him. He's firing shots at him, and he's being nice and gentle, but he is not backing down, as we mentioned in the beginning of this recording. Salvation by faith, then works. People that are opposite of that believe in the works. You have salvation by works. That's like most of the religions out there. That's what HaSatan wants you to swallow and drink the Kool-Aid. We don't do that. So here comes a bunch of Torah. Are you ready? I think I'm in chapter 5. I want to make sure I got this right. Nope. I'm chapter 4, verse 30. Here we go. Verse 30. But what does Scripture say? Get rid of the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with the free woman's son. Okay, you the Christian churches, the institutionalized ones, the ministers are telling you, what does the Scripture say? Read it in the New Testament. It wasn't in the New Testament. It wasn't written yet. This is the book of Galatians. None of the books were written yet, not even Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So the believers in those days did not have that to go back on. So what is the Scriptures? Old Covenant. That's it. All that is in the Old Covenant. That's why Paul was trained and he understood this, and that's why Yeshua pulled him aside. And then 3 years of training with Yeshua personally, and he comes back, he's on fire. You see what he's on fire about? He can show them everything, mostly through the Old Covenant. Wow. Chapter 5, verse 1. It is for freedom that Messiah has set us free. That's Torah. Stand firm, Torah. Then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. What is the yoke of slavery? Well, the same thing it is today. Following rules and regulations that have nothing to do from the Father. It's a waste of time. And the added on things. You can't pick up sticks. I love that one. You can't pick up sticks on Sunday. We're going to stone you. Really? The Father gave those instructions, the added in laws, to burden them and to testify against them, as he said. And the very purpose was because he loved them. And the only thing they listened to is hard taskmaster. Remember, they were from the Exodus, taskmaster behavior, because that's all they followed for a couple hundred years while they were stuck doing all this nonsense in Egypt before they were taken out. That's all they understood. So he gave them just what they did understand. He wanted them to get out of it, so he gave them what they are already used to doing under the Egyptians, and he gave it to them too, because that's the only way. That they're stubborn, stiff-necked individuals. We don't do that today, do we? We're not stubborn, stiff-necked. Verse 13, chapter 5. Torah, you, my brothers, were called to be free. We're called to be free, so be free. Be free indeed. But do not use your freedom to indulge in sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire Torah is summed up in a single command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Verse 16. So I say, live by the Ruach, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. If the Ruach is in you and strong enough, that still small voice that lives within you, it's there. And you know it. Then you pay attention to that voice. It's with you. It's not going anywhere. You still got that loud, sinful body voice talking to you to do certain things. So you live by a republic. You live by the law. And you are not under the law because Yeshua took away the punishment, the death penalty that went that. But you are standing on top of the law. You don't get rid of law. You're standing on it now. If you're standing on a firm foundation of Torah, you can't lose. But you don't throw the Torah away. Okay. Verse 25. Since we live by the Ruach, let us keep step in the Spirit. That is Torah. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. Torah. Chapter 6. Brothers, if someone is caught up in a sin, you who are of a Ruach should restore him gently. But watch yourself, or you will be tempted. In other words, don't get mamby-pamby about the whole thing. Stick to what you know. And is truth. Verse 2, that's another Torah. Carry each other's burdens. Torah. And in this way you will fulfill the Torah of Messiah. Verse 4. Each one should test his own actions. That's Torah. Then he should take the pride in himself without comparing himself to somebody else. For each one of you should carry your own load. Boy, could we learn that today. Verse 6. Anyone who receives instruction in the word must share all good things with his instructor. Do not be deceived. Elohim cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Let us not become weary, that's verse 9, in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have an opportunity, let us do good to all the people, especially those who belong to the family of believers. So Paul's taking Galatians right to them. And the next book that comes after this that you should be reading is, as it's written in timely fashion, was the book of Mark. So go to the book of Mark, and we'll start there. Now we have James and his outlook, since he was the half-brother of Yeshua. And you get that Jewish perspective, what's going on there. Most of them were from Judah. And then Paul was sent to the Gentiles, which Gentile doesn't mean lost world. It doesn't mean the people who are lost. He was sent to the scattered tribes. There's a huge difference between people out there who do not and will never accept the word, ever. As it says in the book of Galatians, it makes it very clear in talking about, where are we at here? About the woman salvation by faith. But what does the scripture say? Verse 30, get rid of the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman's son will never share the inheritance of the free woman's son. Get rid of them.